Welcome to the Myth and Magic Authors Podcast, folklore and fantasy topics aimed at creative storytellers. To write stories and challenge your brain with exciting ideas, delve into these presentations and reflections. See how fantasy realms are based on actual world history, legend, and lore. Study fairy tales, nature fables, and supernaturalism to engage in a jumble of concepts that will trigger your fancy and get you writing imaginatively. Now, here's your host, Neil Mack.
Hello, fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to Myth and Magic. I'm Neil Mack, and today I'm going to be talking about quests. What's the definition of a good quest? And I'm also going to provide you with a definition of a new word that you won't have heard before, transelemence, Transelemence. What is transelemence? I'm also going to talk today about ghosts and about whether you can see a ghost in a mirror. But first, let's tackle quests. A quest is, as you probably know, a long and arduous search for something. So the pursuit of a COVID vaccine, for example, is not a quest. And the reason it wasn't a quest is because even though the media keep telling us that it is, it wasn't a quest because it wasn't a long and arduous search. There was a lot of work involved, a lot of people involved, but it wasn't a lengthy search, was it? So in order to understand the elements that were required for a quest, we must get to the grips of the definition. So a quest must be a hunt for something which takes a prolonged amount of time and it's mentally or physically difficult to achieve, or it's difficult to understand or solve. And I suppose you might add to those three elements that if the quest is accomplished, there will be far-reaching consequences. So the pursuit of the COVID vaccine was a hunt for something. It was most likely difficult to achieve, and it will have far-reaching consequences, but it didn't take a prolonged amount of time. The purpose of a mythic quest, though, which is what we're thinking about when we are talking about fantasy fiction, is to focus on the efforts and the struggles of a heroic character who must overcome obstacles, perhaps symbolic and perhaps allegorical, before any conclusion of the story. And around about the time of the conclusion, there's normally an evaluation of the heroic character's achievements. It's often said that a good quest will stress the dynamic and perhaps ever-changing character of the principal protagonist during his or her trajectory through their escapade. Fairy tales often depict a hero or heroine setting forth on a quest, so that's why we're familiar with the concept. And of course, quests appear very often in fantasy literature. You'll know of Frodo's quest to destroy the One Ring in The Lord of the Rings, and of course this is just one of very many examples. And why are quests so popular for fantasy fiction writers? I think it's because we're even more familiar with the concept of moving a character through many hazards and towards a core objective because of our love of video games, which have been around now for at least 30 plus years. But the danger is that if we use the video game quest as a criterion for our fantasy fiction, then the story might not be worth telling. And what I mean by that is that if we adopt a video game style of writing and we create a video game style tale, then it will just be a mission that grabs a few items, meets a few suspicious folk along the way, gets impeded by various side missions, and eventually vanquishes a big end of level boss. This story, this type of video game story, does comply with the definition of a quest because it's a hunt over time. It's difficult to achieve, but it misses another, I think, indispensable ingredient of what a quest must have. It misses the transformation of the heroic character. And that transformation might be good and it might be bad. But there is going to be a transformation of the heroic character along the way. If the heroic character doesn't fundamentally change or modify or reshape before his or her return to the world they left, then there's no story to tell, let alone a story to share with others. And I call the reshaping of an heroic character the transelemence. The transelemence. To get to grips with transelemence in your hero, you will need to try to explore the shadows. And what I'm going to do now is offer you some tips in how to do this, in how to explore the shadows. Tip number 1. Consider the anima and the animus. Animus is spelled A-N-I-M-U-S. The animus is the unconscious masculine side of a female character, and the anima is the unconscious feminine side of a male. It's said we all have a shadow within us, which is why I'm talking about exploring the shadows. And during the quest, you should show how your hero character has opened up, or indeed has closed down, emotionally, spiritually, and sensitively, in a way that may not be completely apparent at the very start, and may not have ever become apparent had they not undertaken the quest. In short, a male person needs to get in touch with their feminine side, and a female person needs to get in touch with their male side. And that's the anima and the animus of transelemence. The next tip is I want you to challenge the archetypes. So if your hero character is an adult, how will he or she become more childlike in their worldview, in their view of the world? And if your character is originally warrior-like, then how will she or he become more pacifistic, more interested in peace? And if your hero character is originally a teacher, how does he or she become a student? And if your hero character is honest, how does she become a trickster? The next tip I want to give you is challenge the status of your hero character. If your hero character is originally a pauper, how will he or she respond if made a very wealthy prince? An example of this is Edmund, who was turned into a prince by the White Witch in The Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe. And they say that all power corrupts, and it seems as if the power that Edmund was offered corrupted him. Another way to challenge the status is that if the hero is small, perhaps in stature, then how will he deal with the sensation of being large? And this was covered, of course, in Gulliver's Travels. If the hero was an idiot before he went on his quest, how does he become wise? If the hero was impossibly intelligent before the quest, how does she deal with being less intelligent than everybody around her? And the next tip I'd like to give you is to highlight the existing extraversions or introversions and flip them. You've heard of introversions, you know what an introvert is, and the opposite of that is an extrovert. So if your character is normally enthusiastic before the quest, make him disinterested during the quest. If your hero character is normally talkative before the quest, describe him as buttoned up during the quest. If the hero character is normally assertive before the quest, make him self-effacing and modest during the quest. And if the hero character is normally gregarious prior to the quest, make him reclusive during the quest. Make sure you describe the overall circumstances that lead to those altered extroversions or introversions. So, for example, if your character is normally introverted, i.e. reflective and reserved and shy, then you'll flip those and you'll explain why you flip those. You'll explain why you flip those through the tasks and the episodes that your character faces during the quest. And there's one last tip, and it's actually about magical items. If you want your hero character to collect magical items along the way, try to consider the synchronicity of such items. And the synchronicity is the mysterious relationship that these items have with the hero. Because if these items are synchronous with the hero, it will make them seem properly paranormal to your readers, rather than just chance objects that they happen upon during the quest. So a woman who was telling her story about a golden scarab that she saw in a dream, as she told the story, the gathering heard a buzz and a flutter, and a rare golden scarab beetle flew into the room, and it landed in the girl's hair. And the metallic wings of the animal were exactly the same colour as the girl's golden hair. So she used this golden scarab later to perform magic with. Of course, there's a link between her and the hair and the dream. Or, before the quest, a hero character worked in an apple orchard, and on his journey he discovers a beautiful apple tree that bears magical fruits that will cure a person of lovesickness. But he knows through his experience working in an orchard that it's not yet time to harvest this miraculous fruit. But he takes it when it's ready, and then he's able to perform magic with it. Or the hero character goes to a wrong address, because perhaps the instructions were not properly translated. Yet he finds exactly what he needs for the next part of the quest at this address. It's only when he escapes the erroneous address that he sees the name of the address that he accidentally entered, and the name of the address is exactly his own name but reversed. If you use this approach, synchronicity, to put in your magical items, and when you're collecting your magical items, then you will connect the hero character to the items in a magical and intriguing way. If you've got any other ideas about using transelements in your quests, and if you've got any tips about writing quests, let me know. Can we see ghosts in mirrors? Seeing ghostly images in the mirror is a form of scrying, and I'll get into that shortly. But let's begin by agreeing with each other that mirrors are, of course, portals to other dimensions. Just ponder the rationality of that simple statement for a moment. When you look into a mirror, you don't see yourself. You might think you do, but you don't. Not really. You merely see a mirrored version of yourself. The tint, the texture, and the contours of the glass will all slightly modify and manipulate the mirrored version that you observe. Therefore, it's not you. It's a version of you. Please remember this when you're checking your face in the morning. And what's more, and this is even more difficult to understand, so you'll have to take a breath. What's more, the person in the mirror is not the same person that everyone else sees. Not only is the person in the mirror not you, because it's a modified version of you, but it's not even the you that everybody else sees. Others see a presented image of yourself, presented. The mirror provides a reflected image of yourself, reflected. And in short, if you really want to examine your true self, you'll have to ditch the mirror and don't worry about what people think or say. Just instead look deep into your inner being. And that is the Snow White evil queen complex dealt with. But it's drifting away from the main point. So let's get back on track, shall we? Can you see ghosts in mirrors? It's important to stipulate at this stage that I'm not suggesting that anything supernatural is going on when we look into mirrors. But, on the other hand, I also think we should properly appreciate how genuinely weird a mirrored surface is. We take shiny mirrored surfaces for granted, probably because we're staring at them for much of the day. Shiny mirrored surfaces have a magical authority over us. And they even have an absolute control over our existence at certain times. And if you don't believe me, try taking away somebody's phone or try denying them a television screen. So shiny surfaces do have a magical authority over us. But back to common or garden mirrors, I think it's because of the symmetrical reality of the mirror world, what I call the symmetrility of the mirror world. Because it's so compelling and perceptive, we don't recognise the deep and intrinsic flaws in our thinking. We honestly believe that the mirror world is the real world, when of course it isn't. It's another dimension. For example, how strange is it that when two people are looking into a mirror at exactly the same time, they see different images on the surface. And when a person looks into the mirror to see him or herself, what he actually sees is the front and back reversed. I think you need to be a mathematics teacher if you want to properly understand the interdimensional aspect of mirrors and the symmetrility of the mirror world. Although we might expect a standard mirror, perhaps the mirror in the hall, to behave in a rational way and to always provide an accurate representation of the world around us, albeit in reverse, it's not true. It won't. When a glass's surface is not held completely flat, then it will behave like a lens and it will distort, in other words magnify, what we see. And a mirror that is tilted even moderately, perhaps because it's not flat against a wall, will give seemingly realistic results, but it will skew the reflected images. And while a mirror curves even insignificantly, although it might curve without you knowing, it will nonetheless reduce larger images. If you add all these factors to the strange ability that mirrors possess because they allow us to see behind ourselves without turning round, which of course is the most useful benefit of reflective surfaces, but it's also a bit like looking into the past. When you factor in all of those attributes and you put them all together, you can guess why some folks claim to see visions in mirrored surfaces. And it's why humankind has, since prehistoric times, used reflective surfaces to attempt to perceive future events or to see outside the confined perspectives of space and time that they find themselves limited by. Mirrored surfaces such as the still dark waters of a sacred pool, for example, or the waters glimpsed in a baptismal font, or the mirrored shiny surface of a polished stone or a jewel, or the very shiny goblets that you might use in a religious or magical ceremony, or glass spheres. All these have been used since prehistoric times for clairvoyance, which is seeing into the future, augury, which is interpreting omens, and divination, which is the gift of prophecy. When a reflective surface is used for these paranormal activities, it's called scyring. That's the definition of scyring, S-C-R-Y-I-N-G. Concentrating on the medium of exploration, in other words, the reflective surface, is said to help the scyring practitioner focus his or her attention and to free their mind, in much the same way that a guru might meditate or a priest might be prayerful before a religious service. Maybe it's a kind of self-hypnosis that they're doing. After this approach, a scryer will most likely report seeing images in the reflective surface. Some scryers even report hearing voices at the same time. The famous French seer of the 16th century, Nostradamus, practiced scrying before he made his famous predictions. He would stare into a bowl of water, or sometimes he'd use a magic mirror, to see the future world whilst he was in a trance. Mirrors seem to lift the veil between what we consider to be our physical realm and allow us to glimpse into a spiritual realm. And it's true that ancient civilizations, such as the Mayans, thought that mirrors functioned as two-way portals between gods and between humanity. To understand how mirrors might act as a portal, we need to recognise that luminescent surfaces are regarded by some as representations of liminal space, and they can therefore be thresholds between natural and spiritual realms. If you want to learn more about the fascinating topic of liminality, you'll need to listen to episodes 13, episode 40 and episode 51 of my Myth and Magic podcast. I'd also cover the subject of liminality in quite a lot of depth in my non-fiction writer's manual, So You Want to Write Fantasy. But I think it's interesting to note that people tend to approach mirrors to ask important questions about their life and about their existence and about their future opportunities at liminal moments in their life. And what I mean by liminal moments is at the thresholds of change. For example, on a wedding night, people will look into a mirror. Or getting ready for a funeral, you put on your best bib and tucker, as we say in England, and you look into the mirror. Or before a big presentation at work, you look into the mirror and practice your lines. And this big presentation may change your future. Or in the dark waters of a font at the moment of baptism. And please bear in mind, by the way, a child who's younger than 18 months cannot see a reflected image, but what do the godparents who are crowded around the font, what do they see in the dark waters? In literature, especially in fantasy fiction, there's a tradition of using mirrors to combine thoughts on mythology and cosmology, and to describe a method of visiting multiple worlds that are outside the typical limitations of the character. And I'm sure you can think of 100 examples. A mirror is a useful device for fantasy fiction writers because it allows the protagonist to wander, even if it's only in mind and spirit, without having to leave a prosaic existence. Sometimes there's even a suggestion of a physical trip to another world through the mirror. Thus, Alice reflects on what it must be like to live on the other side of a mirror's reflective surface, so she chooses to travel through the looking glass in Lewis Carroll's much-loved tale. And on the other side, Alice discovers an alternate dimension in which everything is reversed, including logic. So, for example, running takes you nowhere, walking away from something returns you to it. She finds that her mirror world, incidentally, is divided into further subsections by streams, and of course these streams are also reflective surfaces. And I think this is Lewis Carroll suggesting that there are myriad other alternative dimensions she could choose from, even while she's in another dimension. And you'll know that Harry Potter comes across a mirror of desire, perhaps that might tempt him to attempt to turn back time, the mirror of Erised. And of course that mirror can be used as a scrying tool to see his dead parents. So returning to the central question, can ghosts be seen in mirrors? Some people, notably those who are prone to such things, are almost certain to see puzzling images in reflective surfaces. Some reported sightings might be because of sensory deprivation, for example the darkness of the pool or the glow of the chalice, or they might be due to skewed images that might prove unreliable because the lens was not a perfect surface. And we must also take into account the mental state of the seer, especially if he or she is at a threshold time in their life, especially if he or she is at a time of stress and change, like just before a big promotion in their job, or just before a funeral, or just before a wedding. And the health and the mindfulness of the seer must be examined too, plus of course their use of any recreational substances, medicines or intoxicants, whether it's religious or mystical reasons, or the seer's lack of sleep, or a host of other factors. And I think also there's a lot of pareidolia going on. Pareidolia, P-A-R-E-I-D-O-L-I-A, if you don't know about it, is the disposition of all observers to see recognisable objects and patterns, and even messages sometimes, in totally disconnected presentations. So, for example, we all see faces in everyday objects. How often have you looked at an electrical socket, for example, and thought it seemed like a smiling face looking back at you? People see images of somebody they know in the marmalade or in the peanut butter on their toast. We all see visions in clouds. We all see spooky humanoid reflections in mirrors. Pareidolia is not some kind of psychosis, by the way. It's a normal human tendency. It's a tendency to, when we see 3 dots, we think it's 2 eyes and a mouth. This tendency explains many curious things. We must also consider the subjective nature of experience itself. Sometimes we too easily forget that we perceive our environments in a completely different way from everybody else around us. What I mean by this is that the seen and unseen universe that we experience differs entirely from the seen and understood universe that everybody else experiences. And this is due to our own sensory perceptions being unique to us. Our perceptions are unique to us. They say that each of us has a unique pattern, like a snowflake, but we ought to remember that each of us also experiences a uniquely different world. And although all these worlds overlap and they seem to have very many things in common with each other, each world is experienced in a totally different way. So anybody at any point in their life might experience what psychologists will call a benign hallucination. And they're very likely to experience a benign hallucination in a mirrored surface. It's likely to happen to all of us. So yes, the answer is ghosts are seen in mirrors. And that's perhaps the least disconcerting aspect of reflective surfaces. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have any ideas or comments? Have you used a mirror as a portal in your work, or are you thinking of doing it? Let me know how you're getting on with your fantasy fiction project, and I'll see you next time.